A friend of mine was bullied, so I decided to take action.
I kept silent because I didn't want to worry my parents. I thought of ending it.
Bullying never stops, day or night.
Hello and welcome to a new edition of France in Focus. I'm Nadia Sharbi, and this week we go back to school as we take a look at how the country handles bullying that affects some 700,000 French children every year. And the trouble starts early, with the highest recorded figures in primary school. There, 12% of children say they've been bullied, of which 5% seriously. The serious bullying only grows in middle school and early high school before subsiding as children near graduation. And before we take a look at whether those figures tell the whole story, let's hear from a few young people who've experienced such victimization and its long-term consequences.
For years, Luna was bullied and harassed in school. Her ordeal began with name-calling in the 6th grade and gradually got worse. Then came acts of violence.
In 7th grade, it was fat slut and bitch. And one day I got on the bus and a boy in my class punched me in front of the bus driver and all the other students. Nobody reacted.
Luna became a constant target of bullies in her class. She told a nurse, a social worker, even the school principal, but the bullying continued and it became part of her daily life.
I told myself I deserved it. At first, I was upset. I thought they shouldn't say that. But eventually it became normal. When you see your body changing and you're being told all day that you're ugly, it ends up becoming a part of who you are.
Around 6% of middle school students have been harassed by their classmates, and it can happen to anyone. Before being a victim, Matteo admits he bullied others in 6th grade.
I made a joke about this girl, and the whole class laughed. I didn't have a lot of confidence in myself. And the fact that everyone laughed made me feel part of the group.
A few years later in high school, Matteo had his turn as the target of bullies.
It started with verbal aggression. Then it got physical. You feel rejected, like you don't know what you're doing here.
For most victims of bullying, the hardest part is speaking out. Jade didn't say anything about her situation at school for months.
I kept silent because I didn't want to worry my parents. I often cried myself to sleep. I thought of ending it.
But Jade eventually opened up to her family.
One night, I was really upset and my sister came into my room. She asked me what was wrong with me and I told her everything. She told my mother, and it was that day when I finally got help.
Jade changed schools to escape her tormentors and decided to join a group to educate others about the dangers of bullying, a step towards overcoming her own trauma.
Now on this board, young people have written messages against bullying, and you'll notice that some of them are actually in English. That's because in French, the word bully as such doesn't exist. Instead, it's the wider notion of harassment that's employed, which perhaps makes it even harder for French students to shift the sense of blame and shame that goes with being the target of physical or verbal abuse. But understanding the mechanisms of bullying goes a long way, and it's proven that support from peers is the most effective response, which is why student ambassadors like the young people behind me are involved in raising awareness. Take a look.
Casse-toi, t'as des poux. Va t'acheter un shampoing. Va-t'en, tu me donnes envie de vomir.
4 high school students are addressing a group of 10-year-olds. Constance, Marine, Sian and Luan have taken on roles as ambassadors or helpers. They're here to explain to younger pupils what bullying is and why it's harmful.
Ça commence souvent à vos âges. En CM1, CM2, on commence à se taquiner les uns les autres et à la fin, ça peut finir en harcèlement.
Marine is 18 years old and it's not her first time speaking in public. But for the others, who are just starting high school. This is new. A month earlier, Sian, Luan and Constance were trained as helpers, a role which also entails reaching out to potential victims.
I have a friend who was bullied in middle school, and that's why I wanted to get involved. Today's event is an opportunity to share our experience as helpers in high school and to teach others how to do it.
The helpers are only one link of the chain. Since 2015, educators have been asked to look out for cases of bullying.
More than 3,000 school staff have already been trained, and every year we hold a training session. The goal now is to reach out to parents. The entire community needs to be more aware so that everyone can identify bullying.
It's not an easy behavior to identify, mostly because victims don't often speak out. At Jacques Monod High School, a special adult unit has been created with the aim of approaching bullies individually. It applies a method developed by a Swedish psychologist, Anatole Picasse.
The goal with this method is to deal with harassment by talking about it. So rather than punishing students, we encourage them to discuss things and to empathize.
The method has proved efficient in diffusing tension between pupils and helping make sure everyone has a right to a safe, bullying-free education.
In France, as elsewhere, the abuse doesn't stop at school gates, and a growing number of French children say they've been on the receiving end of cyberbullying. That aspect of the issue is all the more challenging to address for French authorities and activists because of the globalized nature of the social media platforms where the abuse takes place. Take a look.
Cyberbullying is a modern take on old-fashioned schoolyard bullying, which is impacting increasing numbers of young people. 7% have been harassed online, and that figure jumps to 22% for 18 to 24-year-olds. For the past 15 years, this organization has been helping victims and professionals to tackle the issue, which social media has made even worse.
It's easier to be part of this type of violence when it seems virtual and you're hidden behind a screen. You wouldn't say the same thing face to face, but there will be more witnesses. For the victims, the biggest source of trauma with cyberbullying is that it doesn't stop at the school gates. It follows you home.
The Ministry for Education has put in place an anti-cyberbullying campaign, and parents can now even buy insurance to protect their children against the harms caused by social media, a sign of just how big the problem has become. But without the help of social media platforms, it's difficult to put in place measures with any real clout. Facebook relies on a system of reporting offensive content, while others like TikTok follow a different tack. Rather than deleting hateful comments, TikTok enables users to filter them. Overall, platforms try to avoid deleting content outright.
It's how the internet works. Moderation happens after posting. Everybody in theory is free to post whatever they want. Nobody asks for permission beforehand. For them, it's a question of American culture where freedom of expression is all important. They're afraid of censorship.
Most victims won't press charges, often because they don't realize the abuse is illegal, even though minors found guilty of cyberbullying could face up to 1.5 years in prison and a fine of up to 7,500 euros.
To take us further on this issue, I'm joined now by Nora Fraisse, whose 13-year-old daughter Marion took her own life in 2013 after becoming the victim of bullying. Fraisse has since become an activist and written 2 books, one on Marion's plight, the other a guide on how to fight harassment in real life and online. Nora Fraisse, hello.
Hello.
Thank you very much for being with us. 1 out of 10 children here in France say they've been subject to bullying. That's a lot lower than the US, for instance, where that figure is at 20% or 17% in the UK. How do you explain that?
That discrepancy might come from the fact that here in France we don't collect data in the same way. Here we take into account harassment that takes place within school walls, but not what happens outside, which includes cyberbullying and cyber violence, and those figures reach 20 to 25%. And let's face it, even 1 out of 10 children is still far too many.
And it's only recently, and largely thanks to your activism, that French authorities set up a toll-free phone number for children to call up and report bullying anonymously. There's also an annual day against bullying here in France in early November. Is enough being done?
It's never enough, but yes, today the spotlight is a little bit more on this issue. I took inspiration from what I saw abroad, for instance, the Anti-Bullying Week in November. That's a whole month of activism in the United States. A lot more still needs to be done. For instance, I know it's complicated, but we need to offer victims a support line that's open 24/7, because bullying never stops, day or night.
What does the French law say about bullying? How is it punished?
Since the 4th of August 2014, harassment at school has become a punishable offence here in France, and cyber harassment's viewed as an aggravating circumstance, which is doubled if the victim's deemed vulnerable, for instance, a disabled person or a minor under the age of 15. Then, since the 3rd of August 2018, the law punishes online mobbing, cyberbullying by a group of people. That's very important, because now simply sharing or liking abuse makes you not an accomplice, but an actual perpetrator.
And are teachers and school staff sufficiently trained in detecting and fighting bullying?
I'd say we're on the right track. The Education Ministry set up a real training programme as part of the 10 measures put forward by the Education Minister. For instance, all teachers are now trained in the Swedish PICAS, or Shared Concern method. That was developed in France by anti-bullying activist Jean-Pierre Bellon. It's a blame-free approach that's effective in 75% of cases, but it does take time. So it's a useful tool to ensure that bullying doesn't go too far. Earlier we talked about figures, and while harassment at school's on the decline, cyber harassment's on the rise. You really need a global, comprehensive response.
And are there any lessons that France could learn from foreign countries on how to handle bullying, do you think?
I really think that France had some catching up to do, but that now it has the potential to be at the forefront of this global fight against bullying. And I hope that in 5 to 10 years, this type of violence will have been eradicated. But for that to happen, we too, as adults, need to lead by example on harassment issues.
Nora Fraisse, thank you very much for having spoken to us. And with that, we're leaving this edition. Stay tuned to France 24. There's plenty more coming up.